We'll go ahead and do a live demo here. And if folks are interested, go ahead and take out your laptops, follow along. If you utilize auto-scaling, can you change the instance size? Can you move from like a smaller to a larger instance? Amazon's auto-scaling doesn't do that natively. There are some tricks depending on your use case where you could accomplish something like this. But if you have a VPN appliance and you would like to move to a larger VPN appliance, you're not going to be able to easily use auto-scaling to do that. The other question is, can you use Amazon's auto-scaling to improve availability of a single node? The answer there is yes. If you use an auto-scaling group with a minimum size of 1 and a maximum size of 1, Amazon's auto-scaling, if you lose that node, if that node has something that goes wrong, Amazon will actually build a new node for you. So this is a very cool trick with auto-scaling. Min size 1, max size 1, desired capacity 1. If the node ever goes away, Amazon builds it right back. You have kind of self-healing infrastructure that way. So if you had an availability problem with your VPN appliance, you could say if the VPN appliance isn't answering on port X, go ahead and terminate it and build me a new one, and a new one would come back up. So the health checks are either EC2 type health checks, and an EC2 type health check, what that does is that asks Amazon, is the machine healthy? And that's going to, there's some specifics in there that actually I don't believe Amazon's released, but I believe that the EC2 type health check will test for port 22 being open, and it will also check the underlying infrastructure for health. So that's EC2 type health check. There's also an ELB type health check. The ELB type health check will either look for a port or will look for a specific URL. And if it finds that URL, and if it requests that URL and gets a 200 response back, then the load balancer and the auto-scaling group knows that it's healthy. So what you can do is you can say, does Amazon think the node's healthy, or does the load balancer think the node is healthy? If you're running web servers, it's a good idea to at least experiment with the ELB health check, because then what will happen is if the node's not healthy, it will terminate the node and a new one will come back in service. There's a little bit of danger here. If you use ELB type health checks and the node is very busy, or like Apache is overloaded, you run the risk that the load balancer attempts to query the given URL and fails, not because the instance is unhealthy, but because the instance is simply too busy to respond. So you're already at capacity, you have nodes in service, and then they're actually they're CPU constrained at that moment. You go ahead and request a resource, the resource is not returned, and then auto-scaling terminates that node. So the very moment you need more capacity, Amazon's busy terminating the machines that you need. Be careful with this one. At this point, if folks are interested in building auto-scaling groups, go ahead and sign into AWS and follow along. So the first thing that you're going to do when you create a auto-scaling group is actually create a launch configuration. The launch configuration is going to tell the machine what to do when it comes up, and the launch config lets us define what type of instance we're going to be running. In this case, I'm going to be using an Amazon Linux machine, but you could just as easily use like an Ubuntu machine or something similar. Your auto-scaling group will be comprised of instances of a particular type. In this case, I'm going to utilize the T2 micro instance type. So yeah, if you have custom AMIs, you can use custom AMIs with Amazon's auto-scaling. And I'll show you how to do that. Right here, rather than selecting one of these kind of default Amazon AMIs, what you would do is you would actually go over here to My AMIs, and you would select the AMI that you had created. So this right here, where it says request spot instances, if you were willing to delay or to bid on Amazon instances and perhaps get them, you could go ahead and click request spot instances and bid a particular price. So I'm not going to use spot. And then here's the magic of, or one of the kind of magic pieces of Amazon. Right here, what I'm going to do is I have a very simple shell script. And what this simple shell script is going to do is when the instance is actually booted, this shell script will run. In this case, I just install Apache, but you could have this do anything you wanted. You could have this script right here, which I'll show you how to inject into Amazon's auto-scaling. You could have this script call out to Chef, call out to Puppet. I know we have no Salt users, but you could call out to Salt if you used it. But this is how you build your machines using Amazon autoscaling if you don't bake AMIs. So I think we have a few folks in here who bake AMIs as well. So what we'll do is we will go ahead and just copy and paste this right in here. So I've already created autoscaling groups, so I'm just going to use the www ASG autoscaling demo group. Security groups, yes. The detailed monitoring for CloudWatch is actually required for a little bit later on in the demo. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scale machines into service after a minute. So what this does is this gives me more granular metric tracking. So rather than 5 minute, which is the typical metric production time, I'm going to be using 1 minute metric production. That way I can scale more quickly. Otherwise, people would be sitting around for 5 minutes waiting for machines to scale into service. With auto-scaling groups, you actually don't need to expose any ports. If you're using a load balancer, you would probably, well, if you use with a load balancer, you need to allow the load balancer in, but auto-scaling, you don't really need to allow SSH in even. You could just have these machines run as like complete appliances, no SSH, and just have them scale in and out of service and never log into them. If folks work with like engineers who like to hop on prod boxes and change settings around or something like that, one, you can lock out SSH, and two, with auto-scaling, those boxes that have been tampered with, those are going to be pulled out of service at some point, and new ones will be brought in that are clean, which is kind of nice. If you ever encounter like a tampered with box on Amazon, just go ahead and terminate it. A new box will come right back up in its place. That's our launch configuration, and this is going to be used by an auto-scaling group, and the auto-scaling group is going to say, you know, you have 1 instance, 2 instances, or more instances. So I'm going to go ahead and start with 1 instance. Let's say I'm just kind of prototyping something, and then we'll scale from 1 back up to 4. Cool thing about EC2 VPC is you can change instances security groups. If you're in EC2, if you're in EC2 Classic, you can't actually change the security group for an instance. So if you launch an instance and you say, hey, you know, you're a member of the www like security group, and then all of a sudden you want to say, cool, I want this machine to be a member of 2 security groups. With EC2 VPC, you can do this. EC2 Classic, you can.